Have you ever been completely alone and suddenly found yourself inside a conversation that never happened? You're walking home, taking a shower, lying in bed, and suddenly your mind creates an entire scene. Someone says something, you give the perfect response. They finally understand you. Maybe you win an argument that ended years ago. Maybe someone who ignored you suddenly realizes what they lost. Maybe you're standing in front of a crowd, finally becoming the confident version of yourself you've always imagined. And for a few moments, you are not where your body is. You are somewhere else, inside a story that exists only in your mind. Then suddenly, you come back. The room is still the same, the shower is still running, your phone is still lying beside you, and you feel something strange because for a moment, the imaginary version of your life felt more real than the actual one. So, why does your brain keep creating these fake scenarios? Why do you have conversations with people who aren't even there? Why do you replay situations that never happened? And why can a completely imaginary moment sometimes leave you feeling genuinely happy, angry, embarrassed, or even heartbroken? The answer is more interesting than you might think, because your brain is not simply making things up. It's trying to do something, and sometimes it is trying to give you something real life never gave you. You're not just imagining a scene. Most people think imagination is something random. A thought appears. You follow it for a while. Then eventually it disappears. But the scenarios you create in your head are often much more complicated than that. You don't just imagine a conversation. You create the entire environment. You imagine what the other person is wearing, the exact expression on their face, the tone of their voice, the pause before they answer. And most importantly, you imagine yourself behaving differently, more confident, more intelligent, more attractive, more powerful, more honest. You become the version of yourself that you wish had existed in the real moment. And this is where something important happens. Your brain begins to use imagination as a kind of private simulation, a place where life can be replayed, but this time you control the outcome. Because real life is incredibly frustrating. It gives you one chance. Someone says something hurtful, and you think of the perfect response 3 hours later. You walk away from an argument, and only then does your brain finally produce a sentence you wish you had said. You meet someone you like, and suddenly you imagine 10 different versions of how the conversation could have gone. Reality doesn't give you a second draft, but your imagination does, so your mind creates one. Your brain hates unfinished stories. There is something inside the human mind that strongly dislikes unfinished situations. An unanswered message, an unresolved argument, a relationship that ended without an explanation, a decision you still wonder about, a version of yourself you never became. These things remain open, and the mind keeps returning to them. Not necessarily because you want to. Sometimes your brain simply hasn't found an ending that feels emotionally satisfying, so it creates one. You lost the argument in real life. In your imagination, you win. You couldn't say what you really felt. In your imagination, you finally say everything. Someone rejected you. In your imagination, they come back and realize they were wrong. You failed. In your imagination, you become successful and everyone finally sees what you were capable of. The scenario is fake, but the emotion inside it is real. And that is why it can feel so powerful. Your brain doesn't need an event to be physically happening in front of you to create emotion. Sometimes a vivid enough thought is enough. That is why you can become angry at something that never happened, feel rejected by someone who never rejected you, or feel deeply connected to a person you've barely even spoken to. Your mind doesn't just remember reality, it constantly simulates possible realities. The secret reason, you keep doing it. But here's the part most people miss. The scenario you keep creating is usually trying to tell you something, not necessarily about the future. Sometimes it is telling you about a need that exists in the present. Imagine that you repeatedly create scenarios where you're finally respected. Maybe everyone listens to you. Maybe you finally say no. Maybe you stand up for yourself. Maybe you become the person in the room nobody can ignore. What does that tell you? It might mean you don't simply want attention. You might be craving recognition or confidence or the feeling that your presence matters. Maybe you repeatedly imagine romantic scenarios with someone, but the deeper desire isn't necessarily that specific person. Maybe what you really want is closeness, connection, to feel chosen, to feel understood. The mind often hides a real emotional need inside a fictional story. The character in the scenario may be imaginary, but the feeling you're searching for is real. Sometimes your imagination is not showing you what you want to happen. It's showing you what you feel is missing. The difference between preparation and escape. But imagination has two very different sides. Sometimes it prepares you for real life, and sometimes it replaces real life. Imagine that you have an important conversation tomorrow. You think about what you want to say. You imagine different responses. You mentally prepare yourself. This can be useful. Your brain is rehearsing. It is creating a sense of familiarity before the real event happens. But there is a dangerous line, because sometimes you rehearse the conversation so many times that you no longer feel the need to have it. You already said everything in your head. You already experienced the apology. You already had the perfect romantic moment. You already became successful in your imagination. And when reality finally arrives, it feels strangely disappointing because reality is slower, messier, less cinematic. The imaginary version of you gave the perfect speech. The real version of you struggles to say the first sentence. The imaginary version of your life is already complete. The real version still requires effort. And sometimes your imagination gives you just enough emotional satisfaction to make action feel unnecessary. This is when a rehearsal becomes an escape. Why imaginary success can make real action harder. Imagine yourself achieving something. You see the result. You feel the pride. You imagine people noticing. For a moment, your brain experiences the emotional reward of success, but you haven't actually done the work yet. And this creates a strange problem. Your mind has already tasted the reward without having to go through the discomfort. The result? The real work can suddenly feel much less exciting. Writing the first page feels boring. Starting the project feels difficult. Practicing feels exhausting because the imaginary version gave you the highlight reel. But reality is asking you to film the entire movie, one slow scene at a time. This is why some people spend hours imagining the person they want to become, but very little time becoming that person. They are not lazy because they lack dreams. Sometimes they are stuck because the dream has become too emotionally satisfying. The mind has experienced the destination, but the body still has to walk there. Why you always control the imaginary version. There is another reason these scenarios feel so powerful. Real life is full of things you cannot control. You cannot control whether someone likes you. You cannot control how someone interprets your words. You cannot control whether an opportunity works out. You cannot control whether someone stays. You cannot go back and change the sentence you said yesterday. But inside your mind, you control everything. You decide what the other person says. You decide when they finally understand you. You decide when you become confident. You decide how the story ends. And when the real world feels chaotic, the mind naturally returns to places where it has control. This is why imaginary scenarios often become more intense during periods of uncertainty. But there is a price. The problem is not that you imagine. The problem begins when imagination becomes easier than living. When you keep replaying the conversation, but never have it. When you keep imagining becoming confident, but never do the uncomfortable thing that would build confidence. When you keep imagining the person you want to become, but never allow yourself to be a beginner. Slowly, your imaginary life can begin to compete with your real one. And the danger is that the imaginary world is usually better edited. There are no awkward pauses, no rejection, no uncertainty, no embarrassing mistakes. Everything happens exactly the way you want it to. Reality cannot compete with a world where you control every character, so you begin to prefer the simulation. You think about sending the message instead of sending it. You imagine starting the project instead of starting it. You rehearse becoming someone new instead of allowing yourself to become that person slowly. And the longer this continues, the more painful reality can feel, because reality refuses to follow the script you wrote in your head. So, how do you stop getting lost in these scenarios? The first thing you should not do is try to force your mind to stop imagining. The more you say, don't think about it, the more attention you give the thought. Instead, do something more useful. Ask yourself, what is this scenario trying to give me? Is it giving you confidence, connection, control, recognition, closure, safety? Once you understand the emotion underneath the scenario, the story becomes easier to understand. You stop asking, why am I so weird for thinking this? And start asking, what am I actually needing right now? That question changes everything, because sometimes the scenario is not the problem. The scenario is a message. Ask yourself one important question. Whenever you catch yourself inside an imaginary situation, ask, is this preparing me or protecting me? If you are imagining a difficult conversation and preparing to actually have it, the scenario may be helping you. It is rehearsal. But if you are imagining the conversation repeatedly because you are too afraid to have it, then the scenario may be protecting you from the risk. You get to experience the emotion without experiencing the possibility of rejection. You get to feel powerful without risking failure. You get to feel close to someone without risking them leaving. And this can feel safe, but safety has a hidden cost. Sometimes a thing protecting you from pain is also protecting you from the life you want. Give your imagination a job. You don't need to destroy your imagination, you need to give it a direction. When you imagine the confident version of yourself, ask, what would that version of me do next? Not someday, not in a perfect future. Today, maybe they would send the message, make the phone call, start the project, say no, apologize, speak honestly, take the first uncomfortable step. Your imagination can either become a movie you watch or a map you use. The difference is what you do after the scene ends. Return to the physical world. And when you notice that you've been lost inside your mind for too long, return to something physical. Look at the room around you. Notice 5 things you can see. Feel your feet against the floor. Touch something with a clear texture. Listen to the sounds around you. Take a slow breath. Not because your imagination is dangerous, but because your body is reminding your mind. This is where life is actually happening, not inside the perfect conversation, not inside the imaginary future, not inside the version of yourself that has already become everything. Here, in this imperfect moment. The real meaning behind your fake scenarios. So the next time you catch yourself creating a fake scenario, don't immediately judge yourself. You may not be wasting your life. You may be trying to process something. You may be rehearsing. You may be searching for closure. You may be exploring a version of yourself that is trying to emerge. Or you may be hiding inside a world where nothing can hurt you. Your mind can show you 1,000 possible lives, but you can only live one of them. And the life you keep imagining may be trying to show you where you need to start.
For more videos, subscribe to Think Tickle.